All right. Good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Molyneux, and I am the Vice President of Program Strategy and Learning for Lever for Change. Thank you for joining our session today, Finding the Right Match, Competitive Grant Making for Social Impact. This session is part of the Skoll World Forum's Ecosystem Day and is wholly curated and hosted by Lever for Change. Today, we will discuss how the field of philanthropy is evolving to meet the world's biggest challenges, including competition-based grant making. We will also hear from some of Lever for Change's competition finalists on how they have adapted to better serve and empower traditionally marginalized communities. Before we start that conversation, I want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. Additionally, closed captioning is available for this session. If you wish to turn off the subtitles, you can do so by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Before we dive into the conversation, I wanted to give some background on Lever for Change. So what does Lever for Change do? We leverage investments in bold solutions to solve the world's biggest problems. We work with donors as well as foundations and other funding institutions looking to make investments in bold, effective solutions for social change. We work with donors to design and customize grant competitions tailored to their needs with a final grant award of at least $10 million. We then source applicants from hundreds and thousands of organizations the world over who are proposing unique solutions ready for funding. Our process involves rigorous evaluation from experts and peer organizations in the field. And so far, we have developed and managed 12 grant competitions that have unlocked more than $900 million from competition awards and leveraged funding for our finalists. Our competitions have covered topics from improving maternal and infant health outcomes to strengthening U.S. democracy to the MacArthur Foundation's $100 million athematic global competition, 100 and Change. Later on, we will hear from finalists from 3 of our competitions: the Larson Lamb Iconic Impact Award, which was sponsored by Chris Larson and Lena Lamb and the Sea Grape Foundation, and was focused on transforming the lives of refugees and displaced people around the world. The Equality Can't Wait competition, which was sponsored by Pivotal Ventures, Mackenzie Scott, and the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, seeking to expand women's power and influence in the United States. And finally, from our Racial Equity 2030 finalist, which is sponsored by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Finding Solutions for Transformative and Equitable Change in Social, Economic, Political, and Institutional Systems across the globe. If you are interested in learning more about any of our competitions, please visit us at leverforchange.org for more information. In addition to running grant competitions, we also maintain a network of the finalist organizations and their proposed projects known as the Bold Solutions Network, made up of over 145 nonprofits and social enterprise organizations. We have curated ready-to-fund solutions spanning 14 distinct areas of work across 82 countries. We continue to support Bold Solution Network members after the conclusion of their competitions by offering ongoing capacity building resources and amplifying their work with an array of donors in order to unlock further funding. Lever for Change has a goal of unlocking $1 billion in capital for high impact solutions by the year 2023. Since our founding in 2019, we have already unlocked over $900 million in capital. As you hear more from our panelists today and their incredible work, you will find out how reaching this goal is possible. Today, we hear from 3 Bold Solution Network members about their experience competing in our challenges and how they have evolved their fundraising strategy to better serve the communities they work in. First, we have Steph Cousins, Global CEO of Talent Beyond Boundaries, and a finalist in our Larson Lamb Iconic Impact Competition. Steph has over 15 years of experience leading human rights, humanitarian, and development movements. She has led the successful development of programs, including bringing skilled refugees to Australia and creating an emergency cash transfer mechanism for disaster relief. Steph is also joining us today from Australia, where it is now 2 a.m. So we greatly appreciate her making the Zoom journey to be here with us today. We are also joined by Sarah Guillermo, CEO of Ignite International, a finalist and awardee in our Equality Can't Wait competition. An immigrant, first-generation college student, and a youth organizer, among other roles, Sarah was the very first employee of Ignite over 10 years ago, taking over as CEO from the founder earlier this year. Ignite is now poised for further growth under Sarah's leadership. And lastly, we are joined by Kelsey Scott, Program Director of the Intertribal Agricultural Council, a finalist and a potential awardee for our Racial Equity 2030 competition. Kelsey is the owner of DX Beef, a direct-to-consumer regenerative beef operation operating in the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation. She is a passionate advocate for regenerative agricultural practices and community-focused food systems. Thank you, all of you, for joining us, for taking the time to join us today. We wanted to give you all an opportunity to share a little bit about your organizations and the transformative work that you all do. We're going to start with Sarah from Ignite for introductions.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Guillermo, and this is our slide deck. All right. Ignite is a movement of young women who are ready and eager to become the next generation of political leaders. We launched in the Bay Area on the other side of the coast right now, back in 2010 in just 2 high schools, and I was one of the first high school facilitators in one of those high schools. And we started in California and then started some programming in Texas in 2013 and shifted to a national model in 2015 and have really been growing since. And we received a $4 million grant from Equality Can't Wait. And that was our partnership. And then what we were really thinking about in terms of our proposal was really how are we going to scale Ignite? We had been doing this amazing work for 11, 12 years now. And so in the next 5 years, we're scaling our movement to reach hundreds of thousands of young women all across the country. And this is what scale looks like for us. It's 70,000 young women each year. Thinking about high school partners, increasing our college chapters all across the country, hosting conferences. One will be in New York tomorrow morning, Ignite the Capitol Days, which are legislative advocacy days, legislative actions, and then Run Now cohorts are run for office trainings, and then a variety of different boot camps to help propel young women into political leadership. You can go to the next slide, Vernon. Thank you. And with the infusion of the Equality Can't Wait funding, we're really building towards a $10 million operating budget at scale. So you can see here, we're currently in the fiscal year 21-22 and incrementally going higher and higher. And so we know that the $4 million will be used quickly. And so are able to leverage that pot of money to be able to raise new dollars as we continue to increase our impact across the country. And then our final slide, we've trained 20,000 young women and counting. Here's a tiny, tiny sample size of some of our magnificent young women. And these young women are coming from all across the country, and they have been stepping up into political leadership roles as candidates and electeds, as campaign operatives, as local commissioners and policymakers all over the country, and are really needed right now. And I think our young women are changing the status quo of who is a political leader and how they are making the decisions that we need to really propel our democracy forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We will now hear from Steph from Talent Beyond Boundaries.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So I'm the CEO of Talent Beyond Boundaries. We're a global organization that was really formed out of a global challenge that there are nearly 90 million refugees and displaced people around the world today. And so many of these displaced people have skills and talents that currently are being limited where they are, or their opportunities are limited where they are because of lack of work rights. So refugees often cross an international border and find themselves in this kind of limbo state where they don't have work rights, they don't have permanent status, and they're not able to really rebuild their lives. And Talent Beyond Boundaries was really formed to say, look, these people have incredible talent and skills. Businesses around the world, want to access these skills. It's really not a stretch to connect the dots and to assist refugees to move to countries where they can work, rebuild their lives, and make a difference in countries and communities. So we've been working with refugees in the Middle East, particularly Jordan and Lebanon, and now expanded into our program has expanded globally to work with more refugees in Asia, Latin America, And, you know, we're currently even looking at Africa. We applied to the Larsen Lamb Iconic Impact Challenge, which was an incredible game changer for our work, enabling us to secure a donation of 1.25 million, and also unlock other funding beyond that, which is really taking us on a path to scaling this solution, which we believe really could unlock durable solutions for millions of refugees around the world once we operate at scale. So we're very much a business-led model. So we work with businesses around the world who actually proactively recruit refugees and sponsor their visas and assist them to move on skilled visas to particularly Australia, Canada, and the UK, where we have special visa programs with those governments now. And we're also, through support from the Larsen Lamb Iconic Impact Challenge, expanding our program into the United States, and looking at far beyond into Europe this year as well. So it's an exciting stage for Talent Beyond Boundaries, and certainly has been very much aided by this partnership with Lever for Change, and really excited to be here to talk to you all about how we're scaling. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph. And last but certainly not least, Kelsey from the Intertribal Agricultural Council.
Pettuashte, everybody. Good day. My name is Kelsey Scott. I'm the Director of Programs of the Intertribal Agriculture Council. We're a national nonprofit organization with our headquarters office in Billings, Montana. We were established in 1987 to pursue and promote the conservation, development, and use of our agricultural resources for the betterment of our people. Right in the 80s was the plight of the farm financial crisis. Amidst that time, American Indian farmers and ranchers were 5 times more likely to be foreclosed on than the national average. And really what this was a symptom of historical underservice to our American Indian communities, as well as a lack of equitable access to present day resources that were built to and established to support and withstand the farm financial crisis of the 80s. A group of tribal leaders got together and addressed this issue with Congress, and through an act of Congress, the IAC formed. Over the past 35 years, we have really grown and built our programming to meet the needs of our stakeholders out there across Indian country. Our prospectus title in the Racial Equity Challenge was 574 plus strong regenerative food economies for Indian country. It was a very meaningful experience for us to be able to pull our partners together in this space. We had named 5 partners in this work who really were our allies in serving our stakeholders and prioritizing the needs of our stakeholders as their number one agenda. We have put together what we believe to be a solution to racial equity by the year 2030 through the deployment of a regenerative finance model, which would localize and regionalize our food economies back into our rural communities where so much of the agricultural product exists, and will help us to come full circle in addressing our mission of promoting the conservation, development, and agricultural resources of Indian country for the betterment of our people. Through the development of the prospectus, we really started to recognize and reflect that in order to erase generations of racial structures, not only in federal policy, but in program delivery, as well as kind of pitting our interpretations of who we are as a people against oneself, we're really going to need a large nationwide effort that is collaborative and supportive and regenerative in nature, rather than continuing to extract and exploit the resources of the stakeholders that we are working to serve, which often happens in a lot of the vicious cycles that take place in the food systems. So it's been a sincere honor and really inspiring to get to be featured here with these other ladies on today's panel.
Thank you so much, and agree. It's fantastic to be here with all 3 of you. You're all amazing, absolutely inspirational women. So I'm excited to kick off this conversation with all of you. We are now going to transition to a moderated Q&A session. And after that, we're going to open the floor for questions submitted by the viewers in the audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat at any point in time, and we will read them out to the panelists later on, or if they're pertinent to the conversation at hand, we'll add them into the conversation. So please feel free to add your questions into the chat. All right, so we are going to get started. One of the big questions that I have is if you could talk a little bit about what led your organizations to decide to apply for a Lever for Change challenge, and how has the process of unlocking capital differed from your traditional fundraising methods? Steph, I want to go ahead and start with you on this question, because I think out of the three ladies on the panel, your competition finished earlier than all the rest of them, and so you're at a very different phase in this process. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah, thanks. So we were passed some information about the Larsen Lamb Iconic Impact Challenge by a partner organization that we worked with, and it was like this kind of gift from the gods almost, because it was just this perfect timing in our development as an organization. We had proved the concept of our model. We had managed to facilitate refugees to move to Australia and to Canada through our program already. We had a number of businesses who were actively recruiting refugees through the model, and we knew that we had, this proof of concept, but we were scale ready. And basically the challenge was for innovative, scale ready solutions that support the well-being of refugees. And that's like literally, what we do. And given the scale of the funding available, we really threw everything we had at it, because it's actually incredibly difficult for, I think, a new organization. We're a startup organization. We had some success with that startup funding, startup capital initially. But I think we hit kind of a difficult phase, I would say, as we had like proved concept, but it's like switching from startup to scaling. And we didn't necessarily have the relationships with philanthropists who had access to the kind of capital that we would need to move to the next stage, because it's so relationship based. So the fact that this was an open call, the criteria was incredibly clear. We knew what we needed to do. We as an organization really rallied behind it. And actually the challenge, the way it was designed, was almost, we threw everything we had at it, because we thought, even if we don't win and even if we don't become a finalist, this is all stuff that we need to do anyway as a scaling organization. So we need to demonstrate our impact through an evaluation. We need to be really assessing our scale readiness and demonstrating that to donors. So it was kind of preparation that we would need to do anyway for philanthropists just writ large. So it was kind of an easy investment to make, actually. And our aim through the challenge was to become a finalist. It wasn't necessarily to win, because we thought if we become a finalist, at least our work will be seen and more visible to donors. And that's certainly what we've seen. So post the challenge, obviously we were extremely happy to get a $1.25 million donation. But since then, we've also been able to open up conversations with other donors, and receive generous donations from the likes of Mackenzie Scott and others. So and we hope that conversation continues, because similar to others on this group, we have very big ambitions, and we know that we need to keep funding that to really kind of transition. But I just can't tell you how big a game changer it's been. I mean, we really just had proof of concept when we started this, and since then we've expanded into several countries. Our team, has grown in order to support that. Just the impact in terms of people's lives and the number of people getting on planes and landing in safe countries is just, it's been a total transformation since the challenge. And I do think it would have been a transformation even if we didn't become finalists, because of the investment that we made in things that we really needed to do anyway.
Great, thank you so much. And Sarah, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that too, because your organization was also going through an exciting leadership change at the time.
Yeah, well, when Steph was talking, I was kind of giggling to myself, maybe visually giggling, because I was like, oh my goodness. So it was so interesting. So I transitioned to CEO last June, However, I was voted on by the board in the year before that. And so part of my succession planning was literally build a new strategic plan. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And then it became we applied like 6 months earlier and didn't realize that we were part of the finalists until, a quarter into that process. And so interestingly enough for us, like we were thinking about it within a leadership change, thinking about it as the next chapter of the organization under new leadership, but also like got every single team member in the organization to participate in the strategic planning process, which, as you all know, is of organizations that continue to grow. Sometimes that gets really hard. And during a pandemic, doing everything virtually and trying to get people to get real creative. But within that team, that's how we decided that we had been doing a lot of work around training young women to run for office. And that was our very clear message for the first, 9 years of us as an organization. And what we've learned, particularly from the 2016 election and really clearly in the 2018 election, is that we need young women in all positions of political leadership. And that actually came super clear from all of us within the entire organization. And so I feel like the prospectus actually has a little bit of everybody in every single part of it. And we all made this decision of how this was going to get moved forward. And I think for us being able to unlock that kind of capital, one, for an incoming CEO, you can all imagine that is like just amazing. But it's also this layer of like, it's not like we started the work yesterday. We had been doing this work out of a basement, out of small offices, in small spaces for a very long period of time already. And it was a deep validation that what we were doing and how we were doing it mattered. And I think when you look at a lot of the finalists, we are the young women of political power. And so for us as an organization to receive that meant so much, but also for our young women, it was this deep validation that humans saw that their value was so critical in how we were going to shape policy, how we were going to shape women's representation and political leadership. And I think that was the biggest game changer for us. And so it's going to unlock a lot of what we can do and how we can reach people. And then, there's this thing that we're still living in season 3 of the pandemic. And so there's new ways in which we're doing that. And that's going to continue to move forward because there's no other choice but to have new opportunities down the pike.
Super, super helpful. Thank you, Sarah and Steph, for those comments. I think it was also exciting for us to kind of watch you all go through these processes and continue to develop your strategies and evolve them as you work together as a team. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that process of going through, in many ways, it's a strategic review or strategic planning process as you're building out a much larger proposal for a grant that's probably outsized from what you have previously received. So it forces you to do some of that strategic thinking that maybe you don't always have time to do in the day-to-day. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that process shifted the way you think about program implementation or your approach to either that or thinking about fundraising and unlocking capital going forward. And I'll pose that to any of the 3 of you who want to kick it off. If Steph, you want to kick it off, that's great because you're off.
Right. Yeah, look, I think you're right. It was I think time-bound incentive to get our team together on the really critical questions. And because we had a team of people from Bridgespan and support from Lever for Change, there was kind of an accountability mechanism there and really a check on us, a sense check on, that you can have a team of people, we're all working towards the same goal. Everything seems kind of, and Talent Beyond Boundaries' goal is in a way quite simple in the sense that we want to open up skilled pathways for refugees around the world. And we have a clear sense of that vision and mission as an organization. But that doesn't necessarily translate externally. So actually having a external feedback on our processes and I guess a logic check, if you like, on the logic underpinning our strategy from people that aren't necessarily steeped in the day-to-day work that Talent Beyond Boundaries does was extremely helpful. Also, just having a very structured process, I think, with external guidance and support through that was very helpful for us as well. I mean, similar to Sarah, I was a new CEO for Talent Beyond Boundaries just before the challenge as well. So I'd literally started a couple of months before we started pulling together our proposal. So actually having that kind of backing and support as we were going into a new chapter was really instrumental to being able to pull it off and get that kind of rigorous strategy that we now have, which really sets out kind of our approach to scaling in a way that, before was kind of more in people's heads, and it wasn't, it wasn't documented with kind of rigorous evidence and backing. So yeah, that kind of rigor of the process was extremely helpful for us, and accountability as well.
Sarah or Kelsey, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can play off of that a little bit. It opened up a period of reflection for us, where we got to just truly assess how diverse and how broad and how deep our programming actually is. We have a variety of programs that we offer here at the IAC. Each has evolved over the course of several decades, where we were working to address the needs expressed by our stakeholders. And program development takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of sitting down in this chair and writing things out and fundraising. And so you're always looking at what's on the horizon as far as resources that I can try to capture to support the build out of addressing the need of the community I'm trying to serve. And unfortunately, that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for reflection on the program that you just developed and how successful it actually is being. When we finally sat down and we started to comb through some of our database as far as the reporting that we do to document the impact and the encounters that we provide through our technical assistance network, for instance, we were able to track for every $1 invested into our technical assistance network, there was a $14.20 impact in the communities that we serve. So a 1 to 14.2 rate of return, basically, rate of initial return, because that's just a metric for economic access that was available for our stakeholders, which we then know those $14.2 turned over multiple times within the rural economies that it was now being leveraged within. And so just really recognizing that not only was empowering for reminding us why it's so important to have our butts in these seats working on those projects, but really a tremendous pat on the back for our amazing expertise that we have on staff, and an empowering message to be able to share not only internally with our team, but with our collaborators, our partners, our funders, and our stakeholders, to let them know too that we're successful because you trust in us to support you in accomplishing your goals. And that was a really meaningful experience for us. And it really opened up our doors for thinking entirely differently about how we would approach what our horizon was going to have on it in the coming years.
The only other thing I wanted to add about the process piece too for us is we went into it, the organization has been doing training. I mean, that's what our bread and butter is train, insert, age demographic up to age, 25, but train. And what we realize in the process is that our young women, the 20,000 we've trained and counting, are shifting culture in their communities every single day. And when we started to look at, I don't know if you all made a table or whatever chart we made in terms of thinking about what our impact was going to look like over the next 5 years, that was something that we actually really dug into with our Bridgespan folks to really get clarity. And it's funny, I'm meeting with one of them this afternoon, actually, because we're both in New York, but it is one of the things that opened our eyes to something that we didn't even think we were going to go into. And what we actually didn't write in the first part of the proposal but not until we got into the prospectus, because it was this large question of like, well, have you even thought about this? And we're like, well, we're trainer people. They're like, but you're already shifting culture. And so I was like, okay. And it was very foggy for us because it wasn't something we had ever done. But what we realized is like, you need to do both. And that if you're going to shift culture, that's how you're going to get more people trained. And as you train more people, they are, obviously shifting culture. And so that was a really big, like, eye-opening moment for us, and something that we didn't plan for, but was kind of a pleasant surprise. And now that it is like fully an exercise, we hired our first chief of marketing and communications. Her third day is today. and it's really helpful for us to now think about this. And I think it's one of the things in the nonprofit sector where we don't actually think about marketing and communications as much when you're looking at the budget and when you're looking at resources to think about that. But when you're thinking about the particular demographic of Gen Z that we are trying to reach, it is all a marketing and communications game to actually get to them. And so it was a pleasant surprise. I'm really excited because we've been doing so much work around it now. And I think we're going to continue to see more movement within culture shift. And hopefully all of us are going to be able to talk about political leaders as young women in just our daily language. That is the goal.
Thank you. And I want to pick up on something that all of you touched on, which is that, the process kind of pushed you in your thinking, right, around how you sit within the space, how you're framing the work that you do, or the way in which you're doing your work, right? And the impact that you could have that is beyond maybe how you were thinking about your programs going through this process, right? So it's continued to kind of push that thinking. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, has that impacted the way you think about fundraising? Sarah, you were just talking about communications and marketing and how often nonprofits don't prioritize that as much because it's just not, it's not as much envision in terms of like getting the work done, right? The actual daily work of getting the work done for the nonprofit. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how your marketing, your communication, the way that has shifted in terms of how you approach fundraising, if there's been any changes in that, or how that has gone since the process has completed.
I can kick this one off. It's a different way to talk about the organization, because this just became reality for us. And because we had spent literally the first chapter of the organization as a run for office, train young women to run for office, now it's getting our entire community to understand, one, the broadening definition of a political leader. And so as I'm talking to one-on-one donors or like large groups, or like I just had one last night, just explaining that and getting their minds to expand a little bit and understanding that a political leader could be more than just running for office. And I'm not saying just, because we all know it's not easy, but like there's something beyond that. And the importance of flooding the pipeline with all of those different positions has been something that we've really deeply have been talking about at the individual level. And then how do we actually like describe that clearly at a foundation level, right? And so we've had institutional funders that we've had for, 10 years, 2 years, whatever, within the history of the organization. And now we're still the same organization, but now we're just expanding this, and now we're doing some culture shift. And so, I could probably write a whole book or a podcast or whatever on change management because that is literally like internally within the organization and then externally and managing those different layers. And then I think the other part of all of this is like, when you get a large sum of money, some donors will be like, cool, I've been supporting you for X amount of time. Congratulations. It's time for me to tap out. Or, foundations can last 3 years, 5 years. It's time for me to tap out. And so I think that that's still a reality. I'm sure Kelsey and Steph could talk to that as well, because it's just the nature of the game. And so how do you continue to re-engage them? Do you just take them, move them over to a warm list, continue to cultivate, come back? That's a big question. And then at the foundation world, they're just going to tell you no, and then you can come back later. And then we all know this, foundations have been reprioritizing, redefining who they are as the entire world is reckoning with everything between COVID and race relations and everything in between. So there's that layer to think about. And so I think there's a lot to leverage still. Like, that obviously is still the large opportunity, because as I said earlier, it is a deep validation of the work, and we can't undermine that that's a reality as well. And so frankly, for us, that's where we've been leading a lot of this conversation, in terms with our funders, of how do we continue to mobilize, and why this moment is urgent, because there's an election every single day somewhere, whether it's a election in a, school classroom, and whatever ballot it may be, but that's continuing to happen. And so if we're really framing this around how do young people participate in their democracy, in our democracy, then it's going to take all of those different layers of political leadership. And so really framing it with the now, and why that's so critical, but also still painting the picture of, like, what are we trying to do 10 years from now? Because we may not feel the impact tomorrow. And that is a reality that we talk to people about, is like, you might want us to fix the solution today, but like, we actually did not create this nonprofit to, to remedy, to put a bunch of band-aids on a lot of the issues that we continue to face. We're talking about a large scale mobilization solution that is going to change it within this generation, so that we don't have to talk about this anymore.
I might just add to Sarah, that's such a good point about there's donors that when you do get a large donation, you have these existing relationships with donors that maybe have given at a smaller level, and it's like how to, but still, a fundamental income source that's gotten you to where you are, in a position to be able to engage and secure higher level donations. In Talent Beyond Boundaries' case, we're kind of an interesting structure, because we're a global organization, and we're registered in multiple countries. We have separate entities in Australia, Canada, UK, for example, and the US. And really the way we have wanted to structure our fundraising is for those destination countries where we're actually opening pathways and working with businesses and enabling refugees to move on the basis of their skills to those countries. Where they are high income countries, we really want those programs to be funded by the beneficiaries of the program. So, governments and the businesses who are participating in the program, but as well as, philanthropy in that destination country, so that those programs are essentially self-funded. And our aim is to catalyze the change, and it's not necessarily to be operating in Australia, Canada, UK forever, because the aim is, if we can set the systems up properly, they will be sustainable without ongoing philanthropy. And that's what we're starting to see. So for us, it's been really important actually to maintain those donors who are in the other destination countries, even though we've had this success with global fundraising, because really the funds that have come through this challenge and larger scale donations, that's enabled us to go into new countries and to expand the model beyond the countries where we're currently operating. So it has been, really important in our marketing and communications to explain to our existing donors who've supported us in the destination countries where we are, why we still need them. Because actually the whole model is about those destination country programs being able to be self-funded. So I think, that's been kind of an important lesson for us. But generally, I'd say as well, like, our marketing and communications around our work has shifted, I'd say, in the sense that we've put more investment into that and more focus on telling stories of people who have benefited through the program, and also giving them a voice to talk about this program and talk about the impact on their lives. So that's definitely been something that we've lent into since being involved in the challenge.
One of the most valuable resources that was provided to us through the Lever for Change Racial Equity Challenge was access to third-party eyes to look over our ideas and to say, this is what I'm hearing, right? Or this is how I perceive this. What that got us to realizing is, as these foundations are redefining who they are, their perception of us may not always change just because they've redefined what their mission area is now. And so we as non-profiteers have to do our due diligence to make sure that not only are we truly informing a true representation of who we are, but we're making sure how we're communicating it to them is coming across with the intention we had hoped for. So there was a lot of aspects of our proposal where we were like documenting, why there is a problem of racism in Indian country, and the individuals that were helping us to kind of capture and curate all of these ideas into our prospectus, they were like, we don't understand what you're saying here. And so that gave us an idea of like, perhaps the funders don't truly know how deep and entrenched some of these issues are, and we need to take a step back, and we need to do some of that informing and do some of that background and history review. And when you're in the space of addressing these realities every single day, it gets really easy to blow past the fact that sometimes there needs to be a history lesson before everybody can truly come to the table with an accurate understanding of why this work is so critical and why it's done the way that we do it. And so that's been a really meaningful awareness for us to come into through this process. And it has shifted how we interact and engage with philanthropy at large.
These are all such great responses, and I just think incredibly insightful, from your perspective, and hopefully useful for the audience too. And I know there's some questions in the chat. And I want to address a couple of questions that have come up, and we're going to move into talking about partnerships, shift gear a little bit and move into talking about partnerships and stakeholders and the folks that you all work with on the ground every single day. There was a question around whether or not Lever for Change wants to fund organizations that just do one thing rather than programs within a larger organization, and whether or not that should be the takeaway from this event. And I would say that, first of all, to be clear, Lever for Change does not fund these organizations. We work to catalyze and support other funders who are looking to fund organizations in a particular area of their interest. So each one of these women have been part of a competition that was the focus of a donor or a set of donors' particular interest area, whether it was around supporting refugees or supporting women in power or supporting racial equity. So the choice is ultimately up to the donors and what they are looking for. Within our competitions, we outline very clearly who is eligible, who is not eligible, the types of organizations, the global reach, whether it's an international or a domestic competition. So each competition is different. Each challenge is based on what the donor preferences are and the eligibility criteria that we work with the donors to set. And we are as transparent and open and clear as possible about what is required, who is eligible, the criteria by which your proposal will be scrutinized and reviewed, and all of those pieces. So I just wanted to clarify that we're not the ones making those choices. We are supporting the donors in making their choice and helping them along that journey. And then there are some questions around whether or not international partnerships are critical in submitting a competitive proposal. And I'm going to shift that a little bit because not all of you are we're in international competitions. 2 of you are actually working domestically in the United States. But I think the broader question is, how critical are partnerships to the work that you're doing and to putting forward a competitive proposal? And so we're going to shift to now start talking about that. And I think all of you, every single one of you has worked in or worked with partnerships in some key way. And Steph, I'm going to ask you to kick this off because I know that partnerships are completely critical to the way that Talent Beyond Boundaries operates and the work that they do. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the partnerships you have and how you've built these partnerships over the years in order to have a really strong operation.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. Yes, partnerships are absolutely fundamental to everything we do at Talent Beyond Boundaries. And we really, I think, crystallize that that truth through the Iconic Impact Challenge and through the work we did on readiness to scale and what it would take to scale. So really, because we're really trying to change the migration system so that it includes and is accessible to refugees. So there is already a whole system out there to facilitate skilled migration. Millions of people migrate every year on skilled visas through that system. but refugees are shut out of that system. So why is that? In order to address that system failure, we need all of the partners in the system to adapt to include refugees. So that includes refugee serving organizations in countries around the world, assisting refugees to access these pathways. So quite key to our proposal actually was including provisions to support partner organizations like HIAS, like Refuge Point, who do this work, to support them to actually be doing more to assist refugees within their programs to access these pathways. In the end, because we didn't win the challenge, we didn't have all of the money that we wanted to be able to do that, but that's still our ambition, and that's really our next kind of challenge, I think, and we're starting to look at ways of co-funding with partners where we can to support them to do more of that work. But there's also partners with governments. So we just launched yesterday, actually, the Global Task Force on Refugee Labour Mobility with the governments of Canada, Australia, the International Organization of Migration, UNHCR, and International Chamber of Commerce. So basically the idea is like pulling together this whole task force of the key partners, governments, private sector, and the UN system, to look at actually how do we collectively change the system to enable refugees to move on skilled visas. And that again is going to be a piece of work that needs support in order to really maximize the impact and do the advocacy that we need to do to change the global skilled migration system for the better. So yeah, partnerships are absolutely fundamental. The literature that was provided in the challenge around partnerships and replicating partners, and actually what it takes to kind of develop replicating partnerships that work, and how hard that is actually, was really beneficial in kind of really crystallizing what we need to do. And I think this is the next phase where, you know, we know that we can't scale this by TBB just growing and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and doing it all ourselves. Like, it absolutely has to be partners in the system adapting. And some of these partners are just so much bigger than TBB will ever be, and they have so much more capacity actually to provide that support. So it's about activating them as best we can.
I can speak a little bit to the partnership space as well. We recognized throughout, taking a step back and reflecting inward on how we'd been developing these programs and why they were developed the way they were, that we really saw our contribution to our stakeholders through an Indigenous framing of program design and awareness that it's all a living system and everything is interconnected. And so we didn't necessarily ever target just one, siloed effort, right? We knew that our policy work involved directly the impact of our technical assistance network, which also was informed by our regenerative economies programming. I mean, so it all interplayed. And when we started to assess our partnerships throughout this, we realized that our partners that were our most successful viewed us with that living systems framework. They knew that we played a very important role in this ecosystem of work, which they could complement through the roles and responsibilities that they carried. And in concert together, we could provide a more robust ecosystem within which our stakeholders could thrive. When we started to reflect on some of the partnerships that we had in place with who either had been providing us funding or resources or support that didn't meet those criteria, we started to recognize that really continuing to engage in that space, in that manner that didn't have a cultural match with the way that we wanted to uphold our standards as an organization, really did have a degenerative nature to it. And we started to assess, why are we engaged in this partnership? And is it truly the partnerships that we think are going to continue to move forward the agenda that is needed for serving our stakeholders? And so it's not just about identifying, or it's not just about only the partners that do support your work. Sometimes it's about the partners that you think are supporting your work, but maybe are only supporting your work for their agenda, or they're supporting your work in a different manner than what matches with your core values. And that's very meaningful to be aware of and to recognize as well, because then you can, kind of interpret your portfolio of funding or your portfolio of support a little bit differently. And it helps you to do a better job of maybe prioritizing where you want to put more of your energy in building and enhancing the partnerships moving forward.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's amazing to me how key and critical those partnerships are for really having the kind of impact that we want to see at scale. Because just like you both said, you can't do it all yourself. You can't just keep building bigger and bigger nonprofit to solve all the problems, right? It's really the critical piece of figuring out who are those really critical partners who can help you move that impact forward. So thank you so much for sharing that. I also am curious about how you all engage with the various stakeholders that you are serving, right? So how do you incorporate the experience and the stories of the people that you're serving? How do you engage those stakeholders in an active way, both in terms of your program strategy, your trajectory, your growth, your impact, et cetera? So I'm wondering if you could kick off the conversation around that. I know that you guys do an incredible amount of stakeholder engagement. It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, there is so much stakeholder engagement. And I think that's the only way to do it. Like when I look at the folks that I've even hired, we have, I think 40% of our staff, our full-time staff right now are alums. And we have 3 folks on our board that are that are alums of our programming. And first you think about it in a structural way, because you don't want to just like create groups to create groups, but like how do you actually systemize it so one, it can be sustainable and I'm not just like testing out a new thing. And so I think when I'm thinking about how do you even structure that, get them in there, really support them, because they are then going to be engaging with a whole host of folks. And so when I think about stakeholders, I think about different populations of humans. So for this question, I'm just going to answer it for participant engagement, and let my fellow panelists answer it for other populations. And so participant wise, in terms of just creating this proposal, we did a lot of, getting from the young women, like, how is it going to resonate for you to think about a political leader beyond running for office? Like, they're the ones that basically, shoved us into that direction. And so I think that's huge. And that's where they played a role there. And then we, shared a lot of different stories within the proposal, and do that, all the time. I tell stories about our young women every single day. And I think that's being really clear about that, and having a relationship with our young women, and actually like talking and seeing and being with them and understanding what their story is, so that you can actually talk about it. I will also say that like simultaneously to that, there are a lot of ways that people tell stories that do not benefit young people in a light. And I think that like at Ignite, we're still continuing to figure out how that shows up, particularly in grant making, because there's always a push and pull in terms of how you talk about participant data in that way. And I can't pretend like we are not immune to that, because we definitely are. And that's a huge piece of like, we want our young women to drive what we are doing, because ultimately it is for them, and they are the number one priority that we have as we are thinking about the work that we are doing. And so they are ingrained at every single level, and have really created sustainable solutions for them to always be a part of it.
So at the Intertribal Agriculture Council, we're actually a member organization. And so tribes all across Indian country can identify a tribal delegate, who then comes together at our annual conference, and on a region by region, regional caucus basis, they put together mission areas or focus topics that they would like to see addressed by our organization throughout the following year. And so every year we have an annual caucus report that comes together and kind of helps serve as our playbook for the year to follow. And then that's one of the standards upon which we are upheld to answering to at the following annual gathering, where we do a report out on our accomplished deliverables associated with the past playbook. And so that is one way that we have just ongoing consistent stakeholder engagement, but we do recognize that this only represents a small subset of the communities that we represent, right? So we also have our youth engagement activities at the high school and the college age level, even on down to like 4-H youth groups where we're participating in community events that interact with multiple generations. In 2021, which was, I'll call it chapter 2 of COVID, is that what you'd said? We we had 13,000 individual technical assistance encounters with our team of 13 technical assistants. So that goes to show just how directly involved with one-on-one producers or community stakeholders our team is, and each one of those helps to formulate our understanding of what our stakeholders' needs are. We did launch a stakeholder survey that targeted 3 different groups throughout the prospectus development process with some very pointed questions around the topics of racial equity to ensure we had valid contributions specifically in that space to fold in as well. And then we pursued feedback from existing funders, because in this ecosystem where it demands support financially to do great work, they are one of our stakeholders that we are every day identifying ways to try to serve, really. And what we recognized throughout this process, which was probably the largest takeaway, is success and the definition of success looks different for every single stakeholder group. And I think that that's one thing that's really important each stakeholder group recognizes and appreciates, is that we all get to identify what success looks like for ourselves, and that we should be empowered to do that. And it should not be up to us to inflict an opinion upon another stakeholder group of if they're being successful or not in utilizing these programs or accomplishing the goals that they've identified for themselves. So yeah, that's what I'll share about the stakeholder engagement. It was very informative for us and continues to be.
I'd just add probably one lesson that I think we have learned through when we were initially conceiving of more structured stakeholder engagement with alumni of our program, so refugees who have benefited from the program. It was, the concept of how do we ensure that they have, ownership and also inform the design of the program going forward. And like Kelsey, we kind of built in some structured surveys and stakeholder engagement to enable that. But one of the really big things that came out of that stakeholder engagement is actually that the alumni of the program, really their kind of focus and energy was on how do they help the next group of candidates to come through the program. How can they actually directly engage and support and provide that professional support to others, so that it increases their chances of being able to secure jobs and move on skilled visas. So now we're thinking more about how do we create that ecosystem, how do we enable professional networks to thrive between candidates who have been involved in the program as we scale, because we now have hundreds of people that have come through the program, and I think that's harder to create a professional network, because you actually, it's more about creating an ecosystem, I guess, of where candidates can, or alumni can, connect with each other and provide support to each other. And TBB is kind of out. We're part of that, but we're kind of outside of that. Actually, it's more about alumni helping, paying it forward, if you like, and supporting the next group of people to benefit.
Great, thank you so much. I all of that is fantastic. And Kelsey, I loved your quote around success, and that it looks different for every stakeholder group, right? And that can also be a challenge, right? How do you kind of meld those various ideas of success and visions of success into one thing that you can continue to move forward? So I also want to pick up on another thread of what you said, Kelsey, and this is for all of you, but I would love to hear a little bit of your perspective on how funders can really improve their grant making to support social impact and to support all the work that you all are doing in investment. I mean, Kelsey, you made a really great point that, like, yeah, you have to do all this work, but then also your funders are still a stakeholder, and their vision of what success may look very different from your vision of success, right? Or from your stakeholders' vision of success. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, there may be funders in the audience today, but I'd love to hear thoughts on what could we be doing better as funders, as a larger group, and how do we need to push funders to maybe reframe the way that they're operating? If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think it's important that we reflect on the power dynamic that exists between a grantor and a grantee. And so one, first and foremost, could just be considering the language that's used. I have a meeting with my grantee, I mean, that automatically presumes that they are existing in that space because of the resource that you've given them. And that's not at all intended to come across as a bash on the fact that we don't appreciate the resource that's given, but it does put us in this unique space where we feel the need to constantly ascribe to what you may think success looks like. And so coming into that space instead as collaborators, I think not only empowers us to be more transparent and honest and willing to tell you what we actually need rather than trying to create a beautiful picture of what's happening as a result of the resources that you've given us. But it also allows us to entrust you as a partner in that work. And I think that would be even more empowering for most philanthropic groups, for them to truly be a partner in the space and to truly be in the trenches with us doing some of this work and getting to know, seeing how we do the things. And it's such rewarding work. That's why we do it. It's essential and necessary work. That's also why we do it. But sometimes it's work that is very grueling, very tedious, doesn't always look the most beautiful on paper. And so finding a way to collaborate through a more partnership scope with your grantees is a really good way to ensure that, one, your reporting procedures are encompassing the success that the stakeholders they serve actually is requesting. Two, your patterns for requesting these reports are actually in line with when their workload can substantiate it. There's a long list of just very systematic shifts that I think can be made to support the ways that our nonprofits serve the stakeholders that they serve. And beyond that, also, we should appreciate that nonprofits, unfortunately, most often have to be competitors in this space to enter into that power dynamic. And we don't want to be competitors. We want to be collaborators. Like, every time I learn about the great work that partners in the Bold Solutions Network are doing, I'm like, I want to be involved with that. That's so cool. But the reality is, we had to compete against each other to get funding to be able to do this great work that we do. And that's just a really vicious cycle, and it's not regenerative. And we have to figure out how to kind of shift some of that power so that it's uplifting, it's collaborative, and it's continuing to bring us all together.
I think they were all fantastic points, and I agree with them entirely. I mean, one thing I would just add is that change is not linear, and you can have many twists and turns. And I think those philanthropic partners who recognize that and are flexible and are there with you during the hard times and the times of massive impact, that's really where you get the incredible impact. Because I think every nonprofit leader knows, you have times when financial struggles for the organization can really take you off mission and take you into a space where you've got to focus on the financial survival of your organization instead of the impact that that you can have. So those philanthropic partners who are there to kind of weather those storms with you, and I think we've been incredibly lucky to have that with some of our philanthropic partners. They're really the partners, I think, that will have longer impact in the long term and be putting their resources behind sustainable change.
I just have two things to add. Ditto to both of what Steph and Kelsey said, because yes, the one thing that I thought was really great about the proposal creation process is actually being able to get some funding to actually do that, and start that before. So all the finalists because we're an awardee, but all the finalists receive funding in order to actually like carve out the time and the energy to write the proposal and to be able to do that. And I think that was really helpful. And so I think continuing that, always increasing it is always a good idea, because it does, there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle in doing that. And I think the other part that I would think of is just really like, how do we do trust-based philanthropy in a really concrete way? A lot of my funders over the past 2 years, were very data driven, and I'm not saying that they're not now, but a lot of the conversations have shifted into conversations versus a ton of like typing up another report or doing another thing. And like for Ignite, we did our very first video annual report for the last fiscal year. And I mean, I know Jenna's on this call and she saw it, but like everybody that was able to like absorb our content in a different way was like, I don't need to actually have a conversation with you about your grant because I just watched the thing and like I was able to see it, feel it, and get something with it. And so one of the things I have said time and time again, particularly over the past, 26 months, is like there was a lot of old ways of doing things that we just don't need to continue. And one of them is that, and I know that there are protocols and, I'm a policy person, I get it, but there is a deep opportunity to be able to shift the way in which we think about things. And like, that's what all of our 3 organizations have been doing, frankly. And so I know that there are critical minds that are thinking about this all around the world, and there are a lot of opportunities. And so I think from a funder's perspective, I really think that there are a lot of tangible things that we can continue to shift. And I'm sure that we'll see that in the next lever of change challenge really reflected.
Thank you all so much. I think we have time for one more question. And this kind of ties a little bit, Steph, to something that you started to touch on a bit, which is how do you balance the idea of expanding the potential scope of your work without mission creep or submitting yourself for an opportunity that might be a bit too far outside of your mission? And I know that this happens a lot, right? You get a funding opportunity and it's like, oh, now we need to maybe build a whole new program area to bring in this funding. And maybe some of it we can use to sometimes it becomes a little robbing Peter to pay Paul and that kind of situation. So I'm wondering if you could all even talk about this, if it resonates, but just how do you kind of stay focused on the mission and not get too far into that mission creep zone when you are really struggling to find the funding?
Yeah, I think that is so important. And it's really about, we've started a bid, no bid process within Talent Beyond Boundaries just to try and deal with this risk that, we end up signing up for funding opportunities that, whether we're successful or not, actually take us off our priority mission and course. So we do, we now have this structured process where anyone in the organization who wants to bid for a new funding opportunity needs to kind of really justify it, invite comment from the whole team, clarify how it fits with the strategy. And, we only go ahead where it's like a strategic fit and we know what is involved in terms of like the resource lift to get it off the ground. I think if we had done the Last and Lamb Iconic Impact Challenge without it being core to our mission, it could have really hurt us, like, because it was a major investment of time, and irrespective of the funding, like, I actually think that would have been quite destructive to our mission if it wasn't like relevant to our core mission. So we were incredibly fortunate that it was completely relevant to our mission. But I think that's so important for organizations to avoid that kind of, we do have to chase funding. That's how, that's the nature of the beast. But we need to be very, very careful about when we do and when we don't, and intentional about not going after funding that we know will take us off course.
Thank you. Sarah, Kelsey?
I was just going to say, Steph, I want to see that process because we're not immune to that issue either. Like everybody sees a pot of money and is like, ooh, is that an opportunity for us? And we, one of our board members actually like wrote a book about how to like dare to be bad. And we've really been incorporating that into our like mentality here at Ignite, is like, there's so many things we want to do. How do we stay within that? And then what of that do we just like dare to be bad in? Meaning that it's not like it's going to be low quality, but like it's just not, maybe we're just not going to do it this year type of thing. So I think that that's a really big part. The mission creep thing is really fascinating because, like for us, and I'll just give you an example of how this plays out at Ignite. We, as an organization, had been training young women to register voters for the entirety of our organizational life. And we decided that we were going to really amp up those efforts in 18 and 20, particularly for the midterms and for the presidential, and spent a lot of resources shifting and actually talking to donors about it, and them getting really excited because it's right in front of their face. They can feel it, they can touch it. Outside of like what I was talking about earlier, it's like, I'm building a dream and a reality for you that's like over here. But this one, they could like touch and feel, they could get in it. And now it's a question of like, well, what do we do with that? Like, how do we continue it on? How do you do it every day? And it is this push and pull within the organization of like, well, do we only do that during certain months of the year? What's the capacity for it? Do you staff it? And so I share that example, not to say I have like a magic wand of an answer to it by any means, but like that is a real life thing that we constantly deal with, because we're not just one thing, we're all of these things, and spending the time to actually do that with our staff so that everybody understands it and it doesn't feel like it's a silo decision has been one of the practices that we're trying to get really clear on, because there's going to be an election again, and how are we going to make that decision?
I'll add just a little bit. I think for us, having our established caucus reports, which kind of serve as our playbook on an annual basis, it helps us to interpret kind of the trends that are needed out there by our stakeholders. Also ensuring that we've got adequate ways internally for that sort of feedback, making sure that we sit down with our team to review the playbook and to say, okay, does this seem like an accurate representation of the encounters that you're having out there in the field engaging in this work, or what's missing, what's included that you don't think is a good fit? And then we try to pull that apart a little bit, because there's, for some reason, it's surfaced in what's been requested by the individuals who believe enough in our mission as an organization to be a member. And so just making sure that our mission appropriately evolves with the need, but also maintains an integrity to it over time. And that's just an internal battle that I think that really every business, every entity, every organization has to identify a way that works effectively for them to do that. Having a very robust understanding of what like your strategic plans are over the next 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, and then really running through the thought process when you see a pot of funding. Okay, where does this actually directly fund one of our plans that we have put forth? And if it doesn't fit there, having a dynamic digital Rolodex of partners that are also serving the people that you're working to serve, who you can share that resource with. I mean, I feel like a part of it is we feel this like time-bound nature to needing to access the funding because there's a deadline coming up, and it's just grueling work to make sure that you've got the doors open year in and year out. But if you can give yourself that peace of mind of saying, this isn't perfect for our mission, but I know about Farmers Legal Action Group over there, and I think this aligns pretty good, and I'm going to send that over to them instead and ask them if there's any way I can support them through our own mission areas, then it kind of helps you sleep a little better at night, I feel like. I want to make sure and mention too, though, that philanthropy plays a big role in this. Appreciating that there is a need to have conversation with your potential organizations that you're going to fund about their mission, and seeking out ways that you can specifically fund their mission and fund the functionality of the models that they've already proven. That is like heaven sent whenever that happens. So I encourage philanthropy to consider how much of their portfolio is that, and directly funding the missions that are existing out there doing the good in the communities.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I feel like that is the perfect note for us to be ending on, and the perfect message for funders and philanthropy that are, across the board. So thank you all so much. I want to just once again thank our panelists. They are wonderful. Some of them are up in the middle of the night, and we greatly appreciate that you were able to join us today. And we know how incredibly busy you are, and taking the time out of your schedules to join us and provide these insights. It's just, we really, really value it. So thank you so much. I do want to mention that we have 2 open competitions right now. One is the Lego Foundation's competition focused on Build a World of Play. The other competition is our maternal and infant newborn health competition. The registration for that closes on June 2nd. So if there's any folks in the audience, it's a global competition. If there's any folks in the audience that are focused in maternal and infant health, please go to our website and check that out. And do go to our website, follow us, sign up for a newsletter so you can hear more about any upcoming challenges that we'll be launching in the upcoming year. Thank you again, everyone, for sharing your insights and for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a fabulous, fabulous weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.